with me, stay in 2 Corinthians, and go to chapter number 11, please. And I want you to look at this as well, 2 Corinthians in chapter 11. Now, you say, Pastor, what was going on here that Paul would write that he was stressed beyond measure and, can't take it anymore, above strength, we despaired even of life? Okay, so later in chapter 11, I believe he would expound a little bit to what it was that he actually went through that, again, above measure and or above strength and that pressing, if you will, and despaired even of his life. Okay, so I think the Bible explains some more of this as Paul continues to write, and then I believe he elaborates or expounds on this a little bit. Now, look at chapter 11 of 2 Corinthians, verse number 23. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. Now watch what he writes. In labors, more abundant. In stripes, above measure. Now notice, this is a very similar verbiage that he uses in chapter 1. In stripes, above measure. In prisons, more frequent. In deaths, oft. Again, he writes about that death in chapter number 1. He writes about above measure in chapter number 1. So I'm seeing a commonality between the two passages here. And then he says this, of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Now, just take for a minute, if you will, and think about this physical persecution that is, and when you think about this, you're not telling me this guy has flashbacks. You're not telling me that he has some serious trauma. Now, he writes about God's deliverance, but he also writes about that he is in despair of death. He also writes about this is above my strength. He also writes and just is very, I think, honest about how he's feeling about his life. But he doesn't lose his zeal for God, right? So, but I'm just kind of giving the human side to this a little bit. Go back to verse 24 again. 40 stripes, so he got whipped 39 times 5. That's a slew of whippings. I thought I got whooped. This guy, oh my goodness. There's no way I don't know how he made that. Verse 25, thrice was I beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeyings often. It means in the water. Back to the deep. But in journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in this city, in perils in the wilderness, and in perils in the sea, in perils among all false brethren. I'm going to stop here for a second. This guy he's laying it out. We talk about counseling and being able to vent. He's venting here, okay? And you see what he's explaining to this church. Listen, I went through this, I went through this, I went through this, I went through this. And you name it. In the wilderness, yeah. In the desert, yeah, I was there. In the city, yeah, I was there. In the country, yeah, I was there. In the ghetto, I was there. On Skid Row, yeah, I was there. Like he was just naming it. Like I've been here, I've been here, I've been here, I've been here. Wow. In verse 27, it says, in weariness and painfulness, in washings often, and hunger and thirst, and fastings often, and cold and nakedness. Wow. And then he says, beside all those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily. Now, what does he say that comes on him every single day? What's the next few words there? The what? Care of all the churches. Now, he has a lot of churches he's caring for. But I will say this. We all care for the church. And you recognize, he says, now on top of all the things that I've suffered, one of the greatest things that weighs on me, right, he says, is the care for the churches. When you have a group of people that you care for, this church does, we care for each other, very much so. There comes some things with that. We'll expound on that a little bit. Now, think about this for a little bit. Journey, just bear with me. Go to Hebrews chapter 11. Of course, it's called the Hall of Faith chapter here. Look at verse number 23. No, I'm sorry, verse 34. Let me just look at verse 34. These are folks that walk by faith, but we don't know who their names are, whatever. But it says, quench the violence of fire, escape the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong. That's interesting. Waxed valiant in fight, turn to flight the armies of the aliens. Have you ever read that before? Turn to flight the armies of the aliens. They say when somebody has a trigger of trauma, they have fight or flight. And here you see both, fight and flight. But anyway, it's interesting. A little bit different meaning, but same words are in there. It's interesting. Fight, turn to flight. The armies of the aliens. So truth of the matter is, aliens are real. Just kidding. It means strangers. Verse 35, women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured. Now think about that. Others were tortured. Not accepting deliverance, in other words, to recant against Christ. They didn't accept that deliverance to recant, that they might attain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in sunder. They were tempted, slain with the sword, wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. Man, thank God. The world was not worthy of these people who went through so much trauma. Ended to their death in most cases there. Now you say, Pastor, we're not having the whips 39 times 5. We're not being stoned, not being beaten with rods. We're not going through that here. But can I just say this? Emotionally, many people are. And the emotional part of what people go through right now, I mean, especially since COVID and stuff, and what different people have suffered and are suffering, and what people are going through right now, in many cases, the emotional is actually more traumatic than the physical. And the mental can be more traumatic than the physical. Psalm 69, and here's David, okay, and he's writing here, and you're going to see something. I want you to see the emotion here. This is what you're getting ready to read is emotional. Now, verse number 69, look what he says here. He says, save me, O God, of course, it's David, for the waters are come in unto my soul. Verse 2, I sink in deep mire, where there is no standing. Again, I'm drowning. I am come into deep waters where the floods overflow me. This is what he's saying. I am drowning in my life. I can't take it anymore. You see Paul writing the similar things in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. You see David writing the same thing, similar in Psalm 69. But you see a common thread through men and women of the Bible that come to a state where they just can no longer, it's very traumatic. I want to explain this word in a minute. The word trauma is not in the Bible, but its descriptions are. And you're going to see how it's outlined and how it's all kind of explained there. The word trauma means this. It's an emotional response to a terrible event in your life. You could say a death of somebody in your family, a car accident, some sort of disaster that took place, a big breakup in some sort of relationship, a divorce, and you can go on and on and on. But trauma is an emotional response. Again, it's an emotional response to a terrible event in your life. It results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, with lasting effects on the way we function, the way we think, all these things. And according to mo.gov, there are 3 types of trauma. Many people know this, but there's acute, chronic, and complex. Acute trauma results from a single incident, one thing that happened to you. Chronic trauma is repetitive or prolonged, such as domestic violence or domestic abuse, and it's been repetitive, and that's chronic trauma, which is a little bit worse. And then you have complex trauma, which is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often very invasive and interpersonal nature, where just many different facets of your life are all hitting at the same time, and it complexes what you're feeling, what you're going through. And so some people will say, I've got one incident in my life, that's it, okay. Very few people in life can go through life and say, I've never had any trauma. Like, did you not breathe? Like, that's life. It's just what happens. So I want you to just think about these things here as we go back to read Psalm 69. I want you to, I'm not trying to be a doom and gloom. I'm going to give you some great hope here in the end, but I have to lay it out to say, okay, listen, this is where people are, a lot of people. Verse number 3, David writes, I am weary of my crying, my throat is dried, mine eyes fail while I wait for my God. Here's what he's saying. I'm crying my eyes out. That's pretty much, if I can just use it that way, I'm crying my eyes out. It doesn't stop. It just continues to happen. And I can't control the waves. There's some things with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm not an expert at all. I'm not going to talk about the medicines people take. That's not even for me. That's a medical thing, and I'm going to let that go. On a biblical, spiritual side of this, you're going to see, I believe that this is part of PTSD that David's going through, that he cannot control his emotions. It comes in waves and it hits you, right? Like it just, whew. And David's writing this and he's begging for deliverance. You're going to see this here in a little bit. Verse number 4, they that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of mine head. Ooh, yeah. They that would destroy me, being mine enemies wrongfully, are mighty. Then I restored that which I took not away. Watch this. O God, thou knowest my foolishness, and my sins are not hid from thee. Verse number 9, he says this, for the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Verse 10, when I wept and chastened my soul with fasting, that was to my reproach. Verse number 14, he says, deliver me out of the mire. Let me not sink. Let me be delivered from them that hate me and out of the deep waters. And he continues to talk about his deliverance. And you see his prayer here to say, God, please deliver me from the mire. I'm drowning. Please get me out of this. Please put my feet upon a rock, which he does later. Please do all this, right? And so now, tonight I want to talk about the triggers. You cannot change a traumatic event. When something happens, some things you just cannot change. You can't rewrite history. But here's what tonight's about, and that is this: being able to go forward, being able to know how to cope with something like that, being able to move forward. And the only way I can move forward is by God. So you see, Paul writes that. He says, listen, I'm not trusting in myself, I'm trusting in God. You'll see David says the same thing. He said, Lord, his prayer is, Lord, please deliver me. I need your help right now. And so you're going to see things as you continue as you go forward. There are going to be things that we call triggers. Some things that are big, some things that are small that happen that trigger that feeling that you felt when the trauma happened. And so what happens is a trigger of trauma, which means, I did not have the car accident again, but when that car got really close to me, I can't explain to you how I felt and how like my nerves just went nuts. I got really angry really fast, and just things just started just to explode in my mind and explode in my heart. Was I in an accident? No, but almost. And it was a trigger of that memory. It was a trigger of how I felt when I had the accident. And man, I'll tell you something people struggle with. I was in college, driving on the Dan Ryan, 8094 in Chicago. And worked a lot of hours and this and that, and just going to school, serving on the weekend, going to Chicago, visiting people, and bringing in people to church and this and that. Anyhow, make a long story short, I was coming back from visitation on a Saturday, and again, worked 50 hours that week, 20 hours of school, just a lot. But I got really tired, and I fell asleep at the wheel. You know how, young people, young and dumb, just do it, man. Like Mountain Dew, like just do it. I'm slamming the Mountain Dew. This is before Monsters and all that illegal stuff. So I'm doing the Mountain Dew and all this stuff, and I'm cranking the radio, and I'm trying to do all I can to keep myself awake. I got the window down, my head's out the window. I'm fighting everything that I can to stay awake. What they say, most accidents happen within 3 miles from your home. So I'm getting really close to my exit, which is literally about 3 miles away from my house. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to pull over. I got this. I'm only 3 miles away. And to this day, I still don't know what happened. I fell asleep, I can tell you that. But what happened, I don't know. But I can tell you when I woke up, I was kissing the concrete median. Literally, my window was down, right? So I turned over, and there was a concrete median. The car was shot. Gone. Whole side of the car was toast. And I literally went into a panic that I've never had before in my life. I'm thinking, what in the world just happened? Well, I know what happened, but it took me a while to figure it out. That sound of metal, the sound of just getting crunched and scraped and all that on the concrete. I'm thinking to myself, oh man. But that's the sounds I woke up to. To this day, when I hear those sounds, like it just hits you, because it's like, am I dead? Like, am I going to heaven right now? Have you always just always random thoughts, and that's a very mild compared to what some people have experienced. And that's just one thing. I mean, and many of us have many different things that we go through, and so I'm gonna give you some things at the end on how to cope or how to get through a trigger when something gets triggered like that. So if a car comes really close to me again, I'm able not to lose it and put my window down and get over there and give a what for. I'm able to just calm down and have God deliver and do whatever. But they go far deeper than that, especially when it's relational and with people. Now, triggers will often, let me give you another example here. Cancer is a really big deal, right? And if somebody has a loved one that has passed away from that disease, then anybody else that hear that word, they hear that somebody else has it, they automatically go into panic almost. They start falling apart, and it's very traumatic what happened with their loved one. Somebody goes through a divorce, boy, it's very, very traumatic. And so they're very, very leery about ever getting with another person, but if they do, there are some triggers in that relationship that they don't even know are there yet, because that's coming yet, and they don't know they're there yet. And all of a sudden it's realized, wait, but that's what somebody else that I was married to said, and man, it's just blowing my circuits. And these triggers are just coming one after another. And many times you don't know when they're coming. Now, once they come and you realize you went through that emotion and through that trauma, and all of a sudden you realize, okay, I got some serious triggers here. Sometimes it takes a little while to notice those things, but triggers will often get us to overreact to a very small event or very small experience. And it's just the way it's geared. It can help us sometimes you lose it. And we'll help with this. Triggers will often label a person or stereotype others. In other words, I knew a guy that hated my guts, and he always chewed bazooka bubble gum. And so every time that you see somebody chewing bazooka, I know he hates me. He hates me. Wait a minute, that's because the other guy chewed bazooka bubble gum, so now I'm automatically stereotyping people. Again, the bazooka bubble gum is a trigger. And so now I'm just labeling people, and so I can walk through a crowd and say, oh yeah, I knew a guy like you, you're like him, and you're like him, and you're like him. And so you have to be very careful with that, and those just triggers that come. Triggers to trauma will often isolate us from others. We'll kind of close in, depending on what kind of trauma you went through or are going through. Trigger, when it comes up, you just isolate and just, the fight or the flight, just shut down, or you get explosive, one of the two, against the fight or flight. But again, these are triggers. When they come, boom, right? So I either isolate or I explode, or I fight or I flight. But triggers to trauma can often cloud mental clarity. It can cloud our mental clarity. And so I'm very careful to make a decision when I'm in that mode. And sometimes people can be in that mode for a long time. An anxiety attack is very real. A panic attack is very real. Mental well-being, mental health, these things are extremely real. It's what people face, it's where people are, it's what they're living through. And these triggers that happen, you can be at work and man, something, you smell a smell, you hear a word, you hear a song, whatever it is, boom, 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 and these things are just triggering, and just one after another. Triggers to trauma can often override our own soul. Don't forget what David wrote there, and he says how the deep waters, they flood my soul, and they come into my soul, and they override. And so oftentimes, you can't help the veil of tears that come. They just start pouring out. You can't help when you cry. You can't help all these things. And so it overrides our soul. Triggers to trauma create us to be frustrated. These triggers can create us to be frustrated because you want to have victory, but you don't. And you regret the things that you've said in the moments that you have had a trigger and you lost it, and you regret some of the things that you've said. And now you become frustrated. You become frustrated at yourself, at life. You get angry, all these things, and which we'll talk about that in a minute too. We become very suspect of others who carry the same personality traits of those who hurt us, who say the same things as some of you have been abused. And if somebody has the same clone or somebody has the same whatever, those triggers, and very suspect, and everybody's on trial. Or if they say the same cliches or the same words, if they walk the same way, boy, all of a sudden it's just, you're very, very suspect. And triggers to trauma can lead to worry and to be in a constant state of fear. And that's a hard way to live when you're always in fear and worry. Again, depending on what happened, you're always looking over your shoulder, not trusting anybody. Everybody's lied to me in my life, and all these things that I've been through has been very, very difficult. And so, again, begging God for deliverance from all these things and these fears and emotions that we have. There's a reason why when God wrote, he said, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and power of a sound mind. Okay, there's a reason why God said this. There's a reason why God said hundreds of times in the Bible, fret not, or fear not, or let not your heart be troubled, right? There's a reason why he said these over and over again, because we are creatures that he has made us to be that are very emotional creatures. And there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. When he said, I want you to love your neighbor, that's good. Husband loves your wives. Hey, listen, fellas, he's not asking love from a statue, right? He wants some emotion in that, right? And so part of love and some of the Greek words is, hey, there's to be a little bit of chutzpah, there's a little, and same way with joy. Oh, I've got joy. Man, I'm so happy to be here. Well, you got a problem, man. I don't know what happened to you, but who spit in your lemonade? I don't know what happened, but, and so yes, there is, God made us this way. And the fruits of the Spirit in many cases involve our emotions and our minds and our hearts and our soul, all of that. These triggers of trauma affect the way that we think. It affects our mental health in many ways. And you say the very similar things that Paul said back there in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 when he said, hey, I despaired even of life, and death was upon us, he says. And you'll get to these thinkings and the mental states of life isn't worth it, and nobody loves me. I have no value. I just can't continue. I can't keep doing this. Again, I'm hanging on. I'm just hanging in there. There's no way that God would ever do this. Triggers, if not dealt with, and not being able to allow God to continue to help us and heal us, because it's not an overnight fix. But triggers that we have in trauma will build walls around our hearts. Now, I want you to listen to this very carefully. Again, if I'm not begging God for help to get through this, I don't know if I'll ever get through it in my lifetime, but at least I'm trying to get through it, and I'm seeing some slow steps to victory. But if I don't deal with it at all, if I just ignore it, like just sweep it under the rug and like there's nothing there, I'm fine. After a while, what happens is you build a wall around your heart to where you shut everybody out, that I will never, ever, ever get hurt again. And so, and then these triggers, when they keep coming, you just get more hardened, more hardened, more hardened. And God's like, oh, no. Let me give you some victory on this. Let me break down those walls. Let me give you some deliverance. The Apostle Paul, how God did that in Paul's life, how he was beat by the Jews, but yet gave the gospel to the Jews. Wow. How he was lied about, how he was all these things, but yet he still loved them anyway. Jesus, he came into his own, but his own received him not. Think about this. Jesus he created every single person on planet Earth. He's the creator of life. He gives life. And these people that he made says, no, we don't believe in you. Matter of fact, we're going to kill you. But God commendeth his love toward us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. He came into the world, but his own received him not. Wow. How do you get through that? Jesus is looking at Peter as he denied him 3 times. Jesus says to Judas there, and he sops there in that bowl there, and is it I, Lord? What thou doest, do as quickly. And he's going to betray me. That's going to hurt. Peter's going to deny me, and that's going to hurt. These are my closest fellows. That's going to hurt. He'll be betrayed with a kiss. What an awful symbol of betrayal, a kiss. the kiss of affection is used as betrayal. But what does Jesus do? He just continues to show his love for me and for you. And the Father did a work in his heart. Because even Jesus got to that point where he said, hey, Lord, let this cup pass from me. Like, whew, I don't know if I can handle this. And I've watched every single one of these men in their humanity say the same thing. I don't know if I can take this. And I've watched people in churches say the same thing. Man, I just don't know if I can keep taking this. I don't, in my house or my church or in my work, name it, right? Every area of life, in my neighborhood, my neighbors, they're this and this and that. I just don't know. And the things that I experienced as a child, my neighbor has no idea, but it's just making me so upset. I get these triggers just pop, pop, pop. My kids, they have no idea. I get explosive, but they have no idea. I'm suffering from this, again, triggers of trauma. And so, I believe God has given us a way to make it. But let me give you number one, and that is this. Trust in God's deliverance. Go back to 2 Corinthians, again, if you will, in chapter number 1. Trust in God's deliverance. Now, when is not really relevant, although I hope it's soon, but it's the fact that he can. It's the fact that he does, the fact that he can. And back again to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and look at verse number 9 again. But we have the sentence of death in ourselves. Now, you can interpret this a couple different ways, one of which is we were thinking in ourselves that we were going to die, or we're hoping to die, but that we should not trust in ourselves. So even if I don't think I'm going to make it, this is what he's saying, I don't think I can make it. He says, I cannot trust in myself, but in God, which raiseth the dead. So if God can raise the dead, he can bring my heart back to life again. He can give me deliverance, right? And so this is what he says, verse number 10, who delivered us from so great a death and doth deliver, in whom we trust that he will yet deliver us. Some people say, well, this is talking about salvation. It's not, because if he says he will yet deliver us, means he's not only has delivered us, but he's going to continue to deliver us, which means in this life. He is going to give me deliverance over these things that I'm struggling with, or these triggers that I have, and this thinking of this death and whatnot. And so trust in God's deliverance. Now for you, it might be a little something different, but trust in God's deliverance. Go, if you will, to Job chapter 42. I want you to see this as well. In Job chapter 42, this is Job, and of course you know Job. Can you imagine getting word that your 10 children die, lose all your houses, lose all your servants, lose all your cattle, lose it all? This man is, you read Job, this is a book of trauma when you read the book of Job. But watch what happens here, okay? In verse number 10, and the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends, as the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Now, the captivity here, I believe, is the captivity of depression or mental anxiety or just emotional trauma. And God says, because it binds us, right? It puts us in captivity. And God says, I gave this man, I freed him. I delivered Job when he prayed for his friends. So I know that God does deliver, and so Paul is saying God delivers, and Job saw deliverance, and David writes about God's deliverance there in Psalm 69. And so here's what you got to do. Trust in God that he will deliver. Does it mean that trigger is going to go away? Maybe not, but it's going to lessen your response. It'll lessen, your nerves won't be so much on edge, or your anger won't rise to the ceiling, because I'm going to trust in God that God, please give me a deliverance. And I believe that, so I'm not going to trust in myself. I can't get myself out of this. I can't count to 10 or, count the sheep in bed or whatever it is. That's not the way that, I'm not going to trust in myself for these things. I'm going to trust and I believe in God for this deliverance. Believe that God can. Let me give you a second thought, and that is this. Learn to forgive. Learn to forgive. Hebrews 12:15. It talks about the root of bitterness. Some of you will look at it, and that's fine. But it talks about in Hebrews 12:15, the root of bitterness springing up in me. And it says, this is what it says. It troubles me, and thereby many be defiled. Let me give you before I preach on that verse a little bit, let me give you the cycle of what I would say is a traumatic event. Now, you could add to this, you could change it, do whatever, but this is just my whatever experience. The cycle of a traumatic event. Number one, the shock and awe of just what happened. Like, wow. It takes a while to process everything. Number two, you become very critical. I can't believe, I get so upset. The shock and all, and you get very critical. And then you become angry. Like, oh, man, that's so not right. I've heard that so 1,000 times. That's so not right. The shock and all, become critical, you get angry, and then you become bitter. That's what we're going to get to the Hebrews part. And he says, take that root of bitterness out, right? Otherwise, it's going to keep springing up, and you're going to trouble yourself, and many are going to be defiled, meaning this. The word defiled literally means to contaminate. And so if I take a bottle of water, drop one drop of poison in that water, the whole thing, even though it's 99.99% good, but the 0.01% of arsenic that's in there just contaminated or defiled the entire bottle of water. And so here's what happens. I take my anger, I take my bitterness, and I take that into a house, the people that I live with, and triggers start popping off. And because I have not dealt with that bitterness, what happens is I'm defiling many people. I'm contaminating. It's this poison spread. And man, it's rough. You ever live with somebody who just constantly yells at you? That's rough. There's somewhere in there, there's defilement somewhere. There's somebody's troubled to a point to where they can't get that deliverance. And so anyway, shock and all, critical, angry, then they get bitter, and then they hate. And this just continues to escalate here, and they start hating people, hating God, hating life. They hate themselves because now they're frustrated at themselves because they can't control their emotions, they can't control their actions, and now they hate everything in the world, including themselves. And this is what God says. He says, you're going to be troubled yourself. You're going to hate yourself eventually. And then he says, many are going to be defiled, which means I'm going to contaminate a lot of people. So I want to do all that I can to get deliverance in that. I want to do all that I can to see God deliver me and to do a work and all those things. And so when he says that thereby many be defiled, it says this root of bitterness, and take this out. And so you say, Pastor, how does that happen? Well, forgiveness. So Ephesians 4:32, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. And so I realize that if I'm able to learn how to forgive, then I can realize that God is going to enable me to be able to be delivered from the bitterness that I have over that person that abused me, over the incident that happened, or this experience, or this death, or this unjust whatever, and 1,000 different reasons why people here have trauma. But understand this, I've got to learn what it is to forgive and beg God to say, God, I'm struggling with what happened here. And right now, some of you here, some massive things that happen, especially in childhood. But God, I need, this person doesn't deserve to be forgiven. True. This person, they're fill in the blanks. True. But for your sake, not their sake, for your sake, you need to learn to forgive them. Because it's going to eat you alive, not them. It's going to destroy you. You're going to get troubled. That bitterness is going to affect you, not them. And so for your sake, and for everybody else or that you love that's around you, learn to forgive. All the cruel people, all the nasty people, because my anger and my bitterness isn't helping nobody. It's just destroying me. And so I have to learn. We all have to learn, right? Trust in God that he will deliver. Amen. Number two, okay, Lord, I need to learn to forgive. I got to learn to forgive. And that right there is a big one. But that begins the road to God's deliverance in your life. I'll give you another thought, and that is this. The moment that the triggers are going off, have a scripture in your, I call it the mental queue. Have a scripture in your mental queue ready to go. You say, what do you mean by that? At that time, think about God in that very moment. As your anger is starting to escalate, as your questions are starting to just flurry, as your fear starts to set in, as your anxiety begins to increase and the panic, redirect your mind at that point. Isaiah 26, I'm going to give you a few things that would maybe be a little bit of a help, but just have this in your mental queue like boom. Isaiah 26:3, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. Don't forget, trust in God for deliverance, right? So this verse says, if you trust in him, and he says, if your mind is stayed on him, he will keep you in perfect peace. Now, how many believe the Bible to be true? And so if that means this, when things start getting hot and the trigger pops and somebody just pushed my hot button, okay, wait a minute. You said that you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee, and I do trust in you, Lord. And I'm thinking about you. And so this is another thing that he says. And so I think about the goodness of God and all these things. Now, hang on. I know what's happening right now. I know this guy is just, but I got to work at this, because I don't want to be that angry, nasty old man. I don't want to be that way. I want to see God working through love, joy, peace, all these wonderful fruits that we have of the Spirit. 2 Timothy 1:7, I already quoted it, but God's not giving us a spirit of fear, but of love and a power and of a sound mind. He says in Philippians 4:8, he says this, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's any praise, think on these things, all the good, the positives, and just think on these things. Let me just use the church for an example for a moment. Listen, I could come into the church and say, man, I could get really angry about something's falling apart, somebody drove through the circle again, and mud is everywhere on the driveway again. I walk in and I see dirt on the floor again. Anthony, you did a great job last night, but somebody dropped a whole box of Krispy Kreme donuts. Glazed crumbs is all over, right? And somebody put way too much toilet paper in the toilet again, and the thing's clogged, and here we go, water everywhere in the bathroom. And you say, Pastor, this stuff really, yes, it really happens. That's very frustrating, I'm telling you. You know, and I come up here and batteries are dead in these microphones, and, you know, we got to do it. Okay, come on, fellas, get with it now. I'm not saying this verbally. They don't know what I'm thinking, but I'm thinking to myself, what's wrong with you? It's not true. It didn't happen tonight. But I'm just giving examples. I'm like, if I'm not careful, I could get really frustrated standing up here. And you don't need somebody who's angry up here. So I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. I can't deal with this right now. This is not the time or the place. All right, God, you're good. The sky's not falling. We've got heat right now. So everything that is good, if there be any virtue, right? Good report, praise. Okay. Hey, we got heat. We got sunshine today. Man, thank God. Man, listen, I ate really good this afternoon. Friday night, I ate doubly good. Man, praise the Lord. I got so many things to be thankful for, so you got to be very careful, right? Again, you got to train the mind. And so as soon as those triggers start to come, then I got to be, wait a minute. I need perfect peace right now. I got to stay on him. I got to think on the good things right now. It's amazing how easily our minds are prone to be critical, right? Again, very first steps I think of what happens when somebody has trauma, become very critical. Everything's bad. And get, whoa, hang on, I got to protect against that. And then I get bitter, and then I get angry, and I start to hate people, and this and that. And so I got to stop this, because this is going to really hurt me. And so now I'm thinking about God. I'm trusting him for deliverance. Lord, you know my heart. I don't want to be this way. I can't help it. I can't control it. So God, I'm just going to think on you, and you give me the deliverance. And he says, I will give you. You don't get perfect peace. He gives you perfect peace. This comes from him, but my mind has got to be stayed on him. And when my mind is stayed on him, he then is giving me this peace in my heart that does pass all understanding. And it's a wonderful thing. And so let me give you another thought, and that is this. Be patient. Work at not overreacting or overthinking it. Well, I know what they're thinking. Just wait. I know what he's going to say, what she's going to. Oh, he did that because he really hates me, because he wanted to get. Just be patient. You might find in time it might not be the case. So just hang on a second. Don't overreact. Don't overthink it. Be patient. Peter writes about patience. Paul writes it a lot. He says, tribulation worketh patience. Peter says, patience having her perfect work through tribulations. So I understand that the trauma that happens to me, God says, I'm doing this. I'm trying to work something in you to perfect, to make you more complete, more whole, and it's patience. So forgive with patience. Trust in God for deliverance with patience. Peter said, Lord, how often should I forgive? 70 times 7? Oh, no. Or 7 times, and the Lord said, no, 70 times 7. Meaning this, it's just continue. I can't continue to forgive this. Forgive with patience. Every time that trigger comes up, I forgive. Forgive with patience. Don't overreact it. Don't ever overthink it. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Let's look at this real quickly here. And he writes, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. This is what he says. And look at verse number 29. He says, who is weak? And I am not weak. Who is offended and I burn not? Meaning this, I've been offended and I am weak. Verse 30, if I must needs glory, I will glory of the things which concern my infirmities. The above listed that he gave. I do believe that God wants to get glory in our trauma. He wants to get glory in our weaknesses. He wants to get glory in our infirmities. And Paul, not only does it say here, but he says it in many other passages as well. You go to the very next chapter, chapter number 12, Romans, he says the same thing. He's always talking about the reproaches that he's in and all the infirmities that he's been in and the weaknesses that he's been in. He always writes and says, this is to give him the glory. So as God has given me deliverance, I'm able to give him glory. As God continues to work in my life, work in my heart, okay, I'm giving him glory. This is about what Jesus has done for me. And so now I'm able to give him the glory back and say, listen, Paul writes this whole litany of stuff, and then he says, but he gets the glory in it all. And man, God has done a work. Whew. Man, thank God. God gets the glory. Can I give God glory in my tribulations and say, all glory be to God? Thank you, Father, for what you've allowed me to go through. One preacher said to me, going through a tribulation and whatnot, and he said, Bill, at one point in your life, you're going to finally learn how to embrace God's grace in your disgrace. Yeah. The times that I blew it, the times that I acted out in my triggers or whatever you want to call it, and yeah, I could see that. And God's been gracious to me, and I need to embrace his grace, embrace his deliverance. There'll come a point in your life where you'll be able to say, I thank God that these things happened so I can give him glory. Because if nothing ever happened in my life and God never did a supernatural work in my life, then I have nothing to glory for him and glory to him. But because things have happened and God has allowed all these trials and tribulations in my life to take place and all the trauma that I've lived through, and the older you get, the more that you have, right? And so all the things that we've gone through, and at the end of the day, it's so God can get the glory. You got a church that at times churches go through trauma. Well, why do all these things happen, Pat? Well, at the end of the day, God's going to get glory from the church. And the church is going to be able to say, man, God has been good. Amen. God is glorious. God is victorious. He has delivered us. He's done so many things for us and your family, the same thing. And boy, look at the ways that you can give God the glory, meaning this. You know, I used to struggle, fill in the blank. And when I used to hear this sound, I used to always get angry. Or when somebody would say this to me, here's the worst thing you could ever say to somebody, by the way. Just listen to this. Ah, man, come on now. Just get over it. Yeah, I'm going to get over you, pal. That's what's going to happen. It's the worst thing you can say. But wait a minute, but through this, can I say, you know what? God's given me a great peace. He's given me victory. And man, God is good. You say, what is that? That's giving God glory. That's giving God glory. Kids, you go to school and somebody picks on you at school, right? Oh, Revenge is mine, thus saith Bill Schutt. Oh, man, I just want to pay that kid back. Man. It's funny, after a while, other kids watch you not respond, and you don't get angry. Now, you defend yourself when needed, obviously, but it's the anger part. They watch you keep your cool, and you keep your level head, you keep peaceful. And they'll say, what's different about you? And you'll say, man, it's God. God has given me a deliverance in these areas. Now, let me give some practical thoughts, and that is this. Prevent as many triggers as possible. Prevent as many triggers as possible. Meaning this, avoid the trigger-prone people. Hey, there are some people in your life that'll just make you mad. How many have those people? Okay? Avoid them. That's called wisdom right there. All right? Just avoid them. One person, it's been years ago. One person said to me, and I was a youth pastor back in the day, and one person said, man, Brother Bill, you never stop by and talk to me. Yeah. I'm sorry, brother, I'm sorry. But there's a reason I don't stop by and talk to you, man. Like, I want to keep my sunny side up. I want to stay on the good side. Who are the things that this person would say would just set my triggers, man. Whew. But avoid the trigger-prone people in your life. Whew. Now, avoid the people who incite the triggers with their combativeness, very combative. Pastor, I'm married to that person. Well, hey, my kids are that person. Okay, well, hang on a second. Through it all, God will give you victory. And through it all, God will give you a way to be able to navigate through that and to be able to, people that you work with, it's my neighbor, I can't, and God will give you wisdom through all those things. Now, avoid the thoughts that would take you there. In other words, sometimes it's just a thought that comes in and your mind begins to wander. Now you start to worry. Oh, what if? They say that 95% of the things that you worry about and say what if about never actually ever happen. So there's no point to wonder or worry. What if? But avoid the thoughts that would take you to this trigger, or avoid the thoughts that would take you back to that area of your anger. Avoid the discussions that would inevitably trigger something. You gotta be careful the discussions that you jump into, or you're just sometimes it's you sense that, okay, especially politics, oh boy, sports, oh, or name the topic, right, and just the church, well, for my own sanity and for the sake of my spiritual well-being and for the sake of my mental well-being and my emotional well-being, all of that, I want to keep a right spirit with God. I'm just going to excuse myself from this discussion. Oh, come on, man, you don't want to see me on the other side. It's best if I just excuse myself. And so I need to learn how to avoid those things, circumvent those things, and as you can. There are some things in your life at times that will need to be off limits, and just don't go there. To this very day, I was just when I went to go see my dad. There's that lane where I had that accident. I could take you to the exact spot. I cannot drive on that lane. I just can't. I just get the heebie-jeebies. Like you lose it. I can't. And so I just, so I drove home from Chicago. My dad's at the University of Chicago, drove to my mom's house, and I had to drive on that route, and same road, same everything, and I'm like, nope. I was in that lane, got out of that lane. About a mile from there, that's where I had my accident, got out of the lane. I felt great. I can't explain it, but I felt great. That's off limits. I can't go there, you know what I mean? And there are some things in your life that you have to learn and discipline yourself and to avoid those people, avoid those thoughts, avoid those conversations. Some things are just not wise for you to go there. And that way, again, God just continues to work in your life and continues to give you the deliverance. Let me give you a final thought. Could it be that the things that trigger certain emotions in our hearts or our trauma, whatever, is God's design to keep us low, to keep us needy for Him, to keep us humble and to keep us out of the way. Meaning this, some of you will say tonight, Pastor, I got a lot of triggers. I got a lot of problems. I got a lot of trauma. I mean, if I told you my life story, and somebody sitting here tonight, like your life story is unbelievable. I still can't fathom a lot of what this church right here tonight, what you're going through. And God has given you deliverance after deliverance after deliverance. But you and I both know it doesn't completely go away. And so I recognize I am going to need God the rest of my life. Like I have to depend on God for everything. And I'm tired of this, but that's where God wants me. He keeps me humble, keeps me low. He keeps me needing him. Like, oh man, I need God. Man, do I need him. God, please help me today. And why those things happen when you're younger, I don't know. Why those things happen in your marriage, I don't know. Why those things happen with your children, I don't know. I can't explain those things. But I do know, trust God for deliverance. Forgive those evil, wicked people in the past. Be able to be patient. Avoid the things that you can avoid. Watch him work in your life, and he will. Again, it's not, like I said, it's not elaborate tonight, but I just think it's just speaking from my heart, the things from the scriptures that I will use and help people to say, listen, if you just take a couple of these things, it'll help and change your life. And you're going to experience God and giving him glory and experience God's victory and experience him actually making a difference in my heart. And then your wife or your husband says, man, you're not tripping right now. Wow, what happened to you? I'm thinking about God right now. Man, you're not. I believe that God is going to deliver. I trust in God. And every one of these men, again, the time frame, I don't know. You got to be patient. But just continue to just have that verse in queue. Have that, hey, if you keep your mind on him, he gives you perfect peace. Who trusteth in thee. I'm going to chew on that. I'm going to think about that over and over. And when that anxiety comes, I go to that verse. As my heart palpitation increases, I go to that verse. And whatever the doctors tell you to do, do it. But spiritually, go to that verse and watch God do a work. Watch what God does and let God give you victory. And I promise you, that God, he says it. He will give you perfect peace. He will deliver. He sets us free.